electrode. So you can see them lining up different brain. Quite a long range, so you can have the range being to your phone, I should say. That's kind of an important thing. This would connect to your phone, and actually the application would be on your phone, and it would be communicating by essentially Bluetooth low energy to the device in your head. That's why I say in a lot of ways it is like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires. So. And then, like I said, you would not be able to see the device at all. It would look completely normal and just have a small scar under your hair. And we're making good progress towards clinical studies. I'm excited to announce that we received a breakthrough device designation from the FDA in July, thanks to the hard work of the Neuralink team. So I want to be clear, we're working closely with the FDA, and we'll be extremely rigorous. In fact, we will significantly exceed the minimum FDA guidelines for safety. We will make this as safe as possible. Just as with Tesla, while it is legally possible to ship a one-star car, at Tesla we are 5 stars in every category. So we actually maximize safety and take the same approach. And to emphasize again, like robotics engineers, I think we also especially need people who work on product, who work on and shipped product. So if you've shipped a smartwatch or a phone, or kind of complex electronics or complex device, or advanced medical devices, we'd love you to contact us and support you. So, a very important point to emphasize is that you do not need prior experience on brains. So, a lot of people think, well, I couldn't possibly work really because I don't know anything about how brains work. That's okay, you can learn. But we need software engineering, we need mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, excellent chip design, robotics, and all the things that a company needs to work. Please send in a resume. Actually, it's not just engineering, obviously everything including. So now let's actually move to questions. So a lot of questions that have been asked over the internet, and so we'll do live Q&A. So we'll bring in a bunch of people from the Neuralink team. All right.
لكن ما حدش عرف في واحد كان بيعمل ايه في الجنينه؟ انا تمام بس الفرحه رايحين ساعتين الجلال ويشرح حاجه فيه ربنا يجزيه لكن ما حدش عارف يتجوز مين؟
All right, so if you have any questions, please submit your questions to the Neuralink Twitter account. We will try to answer as many questions as we can over the next hour, and feel free to ask hard questions, it's no problem, and we'll do our best to answer them. All right, let's move over to the Neuralink team.
Perfect, yes, we will continue monitoring. Elon, do you want to come join us? All right, so the first question is, how is the spike detection implemented? Is it on the ASIC? Is it hardware and software updatable?
Yeah, I can answer that. So I'm Paul. I work had a few different hats. I've worked a little bit on digital chip design, and more recently working on some of the algorithms trying to decode the signals from the brain. And the spike detection algorithm, there's historically been many ways of detecting spikes. Typically, people will record data. So traditionally, people think of spikes or action potentials as the electrical events that happen in neurons and is the primary form of communication between neurons. And so this is a hysteresis event where you have currents that flow and generate this. You can think of it as being a digital signal, a 1 or a 0 that's being sent in time, where neurons will send that signal to often thousands of recipient neurons.
Responsibility away from error-prone human surgeons. We're hoping to make the process faster and safer.
Actually, it would be good for people to say, who they are and what they do.
I'm Matthew McDougall. I'm the neurosurgeon, head neurosurgeon at Neuralink.
Thanks, Matt. Is there anything specifically from the robot that can be done to make this faster and safer and scalable to billions of people?
Yeah, I guess we started with just implementing, robot manipulating the threads. But we definitely need to expand to essentially doing the entire surgery with the robot. So there's nothing like really, as far as I can tell, fundamentally like stopping us from doing that. Sort of like at a fundamental science level. It hasn't been done in the past, I think, probably just because like volumes of surgeries hasn't been needed. But specifically for us to scale up to many hundreds of thousands or millions of patients, we will need to automate like the entire surgery essentially.
Thank you, Ian. Garrett asks, what are some of the lower bandwidth activities to use?
So there's a couple of...
Just to say who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Joey O'Doherty. I'm a neuroscientist and neuroengineer working on decoding from the brain. So there's some low-hanging fruit that I think can really be impactful to help many people's lives, and that's restoring movement and communication in, for example, a spinal cord injury patient. And there's a lot of antecedents in the academic world where there have been very nice demonstrations of doing this. We think we can take our technology and really bring that to the home, something people can take home with them and improve their lives.
Fantastic. Gil, there's a fun one next. All you.
Yeah, so we're fielding questions from Twitter, so there's going to be some funny comments. First question is, who are you and what do you do? I'll lead with that. And the question is, can the Neuralink chip allow you to summon your Tesla telepathically?
Definitely, of course.
You heard it here first. That's a definite 100%. Carlos, that is the answer.
It's just one bit of information.
Yeah, it's very easy. That's an easy one.
Actually, Max, this might be a question for you. Is like some of the questions we had on Twitter was, how do you see the Neuralink device and the essentially API growing over time and allowing developers to interact with the device?
So there's interesting questions long term about whether you do decoding on head or on a phone or on a computer. ultimately, so at 1,000 channels, it's possible to send all the spike data to a phone and do processing there. As this gets bigger and bigger, you're going to be more constrained by the radio, so you're going to want to push more of this on head.
Yeah, it's worth noting, like the lossless compression of the data stream is about 100 kilobits with 1,024 channels.
Excellent. So this one came up a lot, and this particular question is from Yosef. Will this technology ever be used for gaming?
Yeah, probably.
100%.
100%, yeah.
I think that a good benchmark of does it work well in humans is, can a quadriplegic, does it work well enough for them to play StarCraft? I think that's a good functional target. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll pull out back from the Twitter questions that are kind of funny. This is a question for the efficacy of the device. Right now, is the device limited to surface layers of the brain only, or can we go deeper? And if not now, what's holding us back from going deeper into the brain?
We are planning on modifying the device and the robot to be able to sew into arbitrary depths of the brain. Right now, we're limiting ourselves only to the cortical surface because that simplifies many of the problems involved with going a lot deeper.
And what kinds of things can you solve on the cortical surface versus when you go deeper?
Sure. So a lot of the low-level processing happens in the cortex in terms of motor intentions, sensory information that comes directly in. So your hearing, your auditory percepts, your visual processing, a lot of that happens in the cortex.
I mean, you could solve blindness, you could solve paralysis, you can solve hearing, you can solve a lot just by interfacing with the cortex. And to be clear, we actually do insert, I guess, about 3 or 4 millimeters into the cortex. So these electrodes are sensing from multiple layers within the cortex. It's that there are deeper brain systems that are underneath your cortex, like the hypothalamus, and I think that is something we'd want to interface with for sure, because that's going to be important for curing things like depression, addiction, that kind of thing, anxiety. But yeah, like I said in the presentation, overall we're aiming for a general purpose device, and really the thing that would change from interfacing with the cortex versus deep brain systems is kind of the length of the electrode. So we just need kind of longer wires and to adjust the robot in order to access deeper regions of the brain.
Awesome. Ian, did you have
now,
anything to
the
add?
robot is designed, like the full length is like 7 centimeters or 8 centimeters.
Yeah, so right now we're designed for like 6 millimeters. The actuator itself isn't actually limited to 6 millimeters. You can go much deeper. That's sort of, in addition to scaling out sort of to the rest of the surgery, also scaling to deeper, which is mostly a sensing problem. So the ability to avoid deep vasculature is sort of an interesting problem that we're working on in the robotics world here. So yeah. Lots of cool problems in the robot.
You're leading robot engineering.
Yeah, so I'm Ian. I lead the robotics program here.
Robot is a man's best friend. All right, next question is, what is the most challenging problem that must be solved in order to meet Neuralink's ultimate goal?
Well, I think one of the harsh problems is kind of, I'd say, material science and especially the installation of the electrodes. Right? What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, you want to introduce yourself.
So I'm Felix Deku. I currently lead the microfabrication team. My team makes up of a group of process engineers and material scientists. And our job is to make the tiny wires, as Elon referred to them, what we call the threads that are implanted in the brain. And of course, the threads are made of conductors and insulators. And choosing the right material that is amenable to the brain and compatible to the brain is something that our team have expertise on, and we work seriously on interface engineering just to make sure that our layers are actually well thought through, well designed, and at the end of the day, when we implant this device, it will be actually functional for either reading or for writing.
The electrodes can last for decades in the brain. which is a tricky thing because it's a very corrosive environment, and you're in a dichotomy where you want to read and you want to sense electrical signals and you want to generate electrical signals, but you don't want to corrode the electrodes over time. So you need to have an insulating layer that is very robust, but also very, very thin. It has to be just the right amount of insulation, and it has to stay that amount of insulation over time. So this is why I think we think probably like a silicon carbide type insulator is probably the best long term from a material science standpoint. But silicon carbide is a tough material to work with, but that's probably the right choice long term. Would you say?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's also, apart from its electrical properties, it also helps with adhesion between the metal layers and the polymer substrate. Another thing that we're also looking at is, since we're actually reducing the electric dimensions, the electric side, the actual side that actually speaks to the neuron, also have what we call high resistance to the signal. So we actually look into like material engineering that will reduce the impedance at that interface, so that we can actually have a very small electric side but still be able to speak clearly to the neuron.
And when you guys say thin, how thin?
How thin? So one strand of your hair is about 100 microns in diameter. We can think about dividing that into 20. So one of the thickness that we recognize is about 5 microns. And we have this possibility to go even thinner in the nearest future.
Yeah, we think we can probably go sub-micron in thickness, but obviously as the thinner you make the wire, the harder it is to sense the signal and to do stimulation, because there's less cross-sectional area for the current to traverse. Yeah, in terms of upgrades, that's part of why I wanted to show the explanted plig, is to show that you can actually take the device out, and there's no observable behavior change. The pig is as happy as before and healthy, and I think this is going to be important for upgrades, because obviously if you get an early device, then by the time, let's say you get version 1, probably by the time we have version 3 or 4, you want to upgrade. You wouldn't want version 1 of a phone, and 10 years later everyone's got version 3 or 4. So it's going to be important to be able to remove the device and upgrade it over time. So over time, the Neuralink would do even more than it did before.
Awesome. So here's a question about the device. We have been talking a lot about read speeds and we haven't talked about read or write speeds. DJ, what are the read and write speeds of the device? If you think of it like a computer.
When you say speed, what do you mean?
Like how quickly can you read information from the brain and how quickly can you write information in the brain?
Okay, so let's see. So one of the things to highlight is that
Well, DJ, what do you work on?
Yes, my name is DJ Sa. I'm leading implant electronics development.
Like a chip design.
And a chip designer, like here. Yeah. The prototype that we were showing, it has 1,024 channels. All of those channels are capable of recording and also stimulating. And in terms of recording, as Paul mentioned, we do have on-chip algorithms to do level of compression and extracting the signals of interest, in this case, spikes, neural spikes.
Sure.
And those things are actually happening at a much faster speed than your brain even is processing those information.
Well, do you want to say like things like time resolution, like within how many milliseconds can you detect a spike, and what's the some technical data?
So in terms of the signals that we're collecting, we're digitizing them at 20 kilohertz. Generally, the signals of interest are anywhere between about a millisecond in width, and so we sort of sample it at 20 times that speed. And we have analog to digital converters that divide that into 1024 level. The spike detection is done in less than 900 nanosecond, which is really, really a fast time. And it's only sort of determined by the speed of the clock. And for making sure that our implant is low power, we're running them at very slow speed. And then for stimulation, we can actually create any arbitrary waveforms with about 7 microsecond of resolution. So basically, whatever you want to draw, we can stimulate and generate those pulses through any
version 1. As we go to version 2, 3, 4, these things will expand, I think, ultimately by orders of magnitude, many orders of magnitude.
Great. Everyday Tesla asks, how big is the Neuralink team and how much do you expect it to grow in the near future?
We're about 100 people right now. I think over time, there might be 10,000 or more people at Neuralink. So I think, yeah,
Couple orders of magnitude?
Yeah, exactly. A couple orders of magnitude. Those are one of my favorite phrases. Yeah, just, a couple orders of magnitude, there we go. Yeah, probably the number of electrodes will grow with the number of people at the company.
That's a super linear relationship.
Yeah. Well, we might need a million people at the company then. Yeah, super, yeah, even more. Yeah. Ideally, super linear.
Our hiring quotas are determined by our channel counts.
Maybe it's 10-to-1 ratio or something.
Cool. So Twitter asks, how does the implant system fare against various disturbances from the outside, like electrical, magnetic, Wi-Fi, radio?
Yeah, so the current version of the implant that we have is using Bluetooth Low Energy Radio. So similar to any Bluetooth devices that are out there, they are able to coexist with other devices. So, the signal quality does degrade because it is a pretty congested spectrum. So we are actually working on some new versions of the radio that are operating at different frequencies to be able to also send out a lot more data and have it be scalable to millions of electrodes. And then also in terms of sort of electromagnetic compatibility and interferences, obviously it's very important for us to coexist with other systems and just disturbances out there. So there are also well-documented guidelines from FDA that we'll be following and doing a lot of testing for.
Fantastic. We're going to take an audience question. Fred, take it away.
So we all want to play StarCraft using Neuralink, but what are some likely first applications?
Well, I don't know if we all want to play StarCraft.
There are other games.
There are other games to play. Exactly.
But also StarCraft.
So our first clinical trial is aimed at people with paraplegia or tetraplegia, so cervical spinal cord injury. We're going to enroll, we plan to enroll a small number of patients to make sure the device is safe and that it works in that case.
Yeah, so actually just to elaborate on that, if somebody is like a severe spinal cord injury, to the degree that they have very limited control even over their facial muscles, then but with this implant you can actually think just by thinking you can output words, and you can type, and you can control a computer, control a phone, and which is pretty wild. And I think something that's very exciting as a long-term application is if you can sense what somebody's trying to do with their limbs, what they want to do with their limbs, then you can actually do a second implant that's at the base of the spine, or wherever, just after wherever the spinal injury occurred, and you can create a neural shunt. So I think long-term, I'm confident that long-term it will be possible to restore somebody's full body motion. So if somebody even has a severed spine, they will be able to walk again. They will be able to use their hands. And like when you have a severed spinal cord, you essentially have broken wires. And so if you can just jump over those wires and transmit the signals over those wires, you can give somebody the ability to walk again naturally.
So DJ, you talked about outside interference. Can anyone talk about the inside interference? So how to protect the implant from the body?
Sure, I can talk about that. My name is Robin. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I lead the implant mechanical packaging and assembly team. So actually making the devices and designing the seal. So yeah, the body's not a friendly place to be. So what we do is basically create an accelerated test chamber that can mimic the conditions that the devices will see in the body. And basically test the devices at as fast as accelerated rate as we can. At this time, we're limited temperature-wise by some of the electronics components, but basically we can test subsystems to mimic the environment in the body. And by that, we've brought some devices in the tester right now to almost a year, and all the implanted ones prior to these implants, we had tested the same architecture in the tester to validate it. And yeah, so there's obviously chemical things attacking the implant. There's pressure. There's mechanical shock and vibration. So all of these things are part of it. And yeah, I think one of the things that really helps is having everything insourced in-house. So we have the capability to deposit thin layers of metal. We have the capability to tools in-house to be able to design any sort of sealing, enclosure, packaging that we need to do.
Awesome, thank you, Robin. Another question from Twitter. What programming language are you guys using for developing the device?
Several. Yeah, we use several different types of programming languages. So for development, a lot of Verilog for doing low-level programming at the kind of the register transfer level. As you go up higher and higher, there are various C.
Plus some Java and Python scripts. But really, those are more just like pragmatic choices to essentially optimize for getting like productive work done. So it doesn't really matter what your background is or necessarily what the tools you use are. It's more just can you like accomplish things really quickly.
Awesome. This next question is from This Is Rex. They're wondering, can this device be used to explain consciousness? In the long term, of course.
I can certainly shed some light on consciousness.
This is a really interesting question. I think the answer is yes. And I think one of the reasons that consciousness is so hard is because, like anything in physics, you're looking at a mapping from X to Y, where X is the neuronal correlate, it's the thing that's happening then physically, and then Y is this phenomenal state. And historically, we've been unable to observe the neuronal correlates very well, and unless it's in you, we've been unable to observe the phenomenal state. So as soon as neuroscientists are able to personally get these tools where they can see the correlates and they can have the experience, I think the hard problem vanished very quickly.
What I find remarkable is that the universe started out as like quarks and leptons, we'll call it like hydrogen, and hydrogen evolved, and somewhere along the way that hydrogen started talking and thought it was conscious.
I like the joke that it turns out that if you bombard Earth with photons for long enough, it'll emit a Tesla.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
it's just
teach you in school. Yeah, so there's a lot of Twitter comments coming in about a question that I think is on everyone's mind, no pun intended. What is the security of the device look like? What kind of precautions are being taken? And what does the future look like for the security of the system?
So first and foremost, privacy and security are top priorities at Neuralink, especially given the sensitivity of the data that we're collecting. And one of the things that we're ensuring is to make sure that a lot of the interactions with the brain data is going to be encrypted and authenticated properly. And I think this has been kind of a sort of recurring theme, but one of the things that we have the ability to do at Neuralink is that we work on every layer of the product, from chip design to source code, and it really gives us a unique opportunity to embed security as part of our design from the get-go, and to make sure that there are no single points of failure. So as an example, we can actually completely isolate sensitive modules like the BLE radio by just segregating it out at the hardware level, and really making sure that we protect the I/O to the brain away from potential attacks, and really minimizing the attack surface. And we have in-house security expertise, and we're also working with external parties to do audits and perform penetration testing.
Excellent. Thank you, DJ.
Well, actually, is there a point that anybody here wants to make that has not been asked in a question, but you think should be a question? Anyone? Yeah.
So, hey, I'm Zach. I work on the microfabrication team. I help making implants. And one thing that I think is really cool, just in general, is that this is a platform essentially, so we can change the design up in a variety of ways. So if we find that a certain design or electrode size or number of electrodes works better in different areas of the brain, we have the capability to do that. I personally think that's very cool.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Dan, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's allowed us to make such fast progress in the last few months is the use of pigs as a model. And we started out choosing pigs because of the very similar anatomy of their skull to humans, same thickness and similar kind of membrane, dural membrane. But then as time went on, we realized that pigs are actually have amazing other properties. You can train them to walk on treadmills. You can train them to do all kinds of tricks, and also that they have this large representation of the snout in the cortex, which you can very easily stimulate. So the question would be, why are we using pigs? And I think we've even surprised ourselves at how useful they are as a model in this respect. And another important point is that it's very easy to keep pigs happy. They have very low needs, and so we can build an environment in which
pigs really love food. This is a true thing about pigs. Give them sort of some straw and some things to play with, and some friends to hang out with, and good food, and they're happy as pigs. And then, yeah, their pigs are actually quite similar to people. So that's, you know, if we're going to figure out things for people, then pigs are a good choice. And they're also quite robust creatures, like little tanks. And then I think one of the questions was like, what if, like, is the device itself? They bustle around quite a lot, and they bump into things, and they headbutt each other at times, and they're pretty animated. So if the device is lasting in the pig, as it lasted there for 2 months, and still going strong, then that's a good sign that the device is robust for people.
Fantastic. One common theme that's been coming up a lot on these Twitter questions coming in is that of availability. And so Matthias has a specific question on this, which is any estimate of how much it will cost at launch and what price it will reduce to over time?
Well, I think at launch, it's probably going to be, I would say that's not really representative, because at first, I think it's going to be, you know, quite expensive, but that price will very rapidly drop. And I think over time, we want to get the cost obviously down as low as possible. But I think inclusive of the automated surgery, I think we want to get the price down to a few $1,000s, something like that. And I think that's possible. I think it should be possible to get it similar to LASIK, and then the device electronics itself, I think will not be very expensive, because it actually does use a lot of the parts that are made in extremely high volume, in tens of millions of units for smartphones and smartwatches and wearables in general.
Great. So here's another question about the device. What does the architecture look like? Is it CPU, ARM CPU? What's going on inside the device that you can talk about, DJ?
I can talk a little bit about the digital architecture. It's fully custom. One of the most difficult challenges, I think, of building an implant is the energy density. So the more electrodes you record from, the more energy you're going to be consuming. And so there was nothing commercial out there. So there's an analog front end that's able to amplify these really small signals, like microvolt range, so that we can actually digitize them. And then take those signals and then find exactly what we're looking for. And there was nothing out there that could basically do those two things. And so that's why we had to build a full custom ASIC. And so there's really, there's nothing out, like it out there.
Yeah, so the thing that I would add to that is, so there are obviously elements that we customize from ground up, like our neural amplifiers and some of the algorithms that we develop, but a lot of the other systems around it are really borrowing from parts that are already been productionized and available from the wearables industry. So BLE radio, or the low power microprocessors that are part of it, a lot of small sensors. So there are obviously the neural sensors that we're developing that gives us kind of a unique data set for our applications, but really a lot of that is getting packaged up and just not really resisting the industry that's been sort of been laid out to really create these devices with very short amount of time.
So here's another question about the integrity of the device, more from a mechanical perspective. So you're replacing a piece of bone and replacing it with an implant, and then the person is going to take that home. How does the integrity of the device fare compared to, I don't know, bone or something similar?
Sure. Well, I think Matt's probably replaced a lot of pieces of skull with plastic and other materials, so I don't know if you can talk about some of those. But yeah, basically, I mean, we know that what the mechanical properties of bone are, and we know what the stresses on the device are going to be. So it's fairly easy to just go from first principles and design for the condition that it makes.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see from the presentation earlier, the implants are obviously very robust. Like pigs move around vigorously, they roll around, they bang into the wall, they bang into each other. They do like headbutting, and way more than people do. Well, sure. But like it's not like the pigs are just walking around very delicately. They're high energy creatures, and I think it's clear that the implants are have been going for a few months, still going strong. despite a lot of vigorous activity from the pig. And attention on the electrodes that are inserted in the cortex. So, well, let's see. With that, maybe a couple more questions, or if anybody wants to make some comments, and then we'll call it a day.
I just want to add to what you just said. So the thread is actually also in the brain. Also, because of their thinness, they're actually very flexible. And so as the pig is moving around and banging their head, the threads actually move with the brain, even the normal pulsation of the brain. And that help minimize stress within the brain tissue also. And that has long-term impact on the functionality.
We sort of present the tissue around it. We have a lot of different ways to image the tissue around it and iterate very quickly on doing things that will improve the overall biocompatibility.
As a closing question, I thought we might go down the line starting with Dan. And what I'm wondering is, what is the number one thing on your wish list that you're really hoping that the Neuralink device will over time that you're working towards?
So my background is in visual neuroscience, and one of the things I think has great potential for the Neuralink is to provide a visual prosthesis for people who have retinal injury or blindness through eye injury. You can essentially plug a camera into the visual cortex and stimulate with an enormous array of thousands or maybe tens of thousands of electrodes to recreate a visual image. And in time, perhaps you can use that same technology in people who haven't lost vision to produce some kind of heads-up display, something like Terminator or something.
Wonderful.
In fact, it's worth saying that, like, over time, we could actually give somebody supervision. Like, you could have, like, ultraviolet or
So I think it's incredible amount of effort to put your thoughts into a set of words, and it comes out completely compressed. So being able to do that seamlessly without being able to compress it with all of the mechanisms would be great.
Yeah.
Completely compressed. So being able to do that seamlessly, press it with all of the mechanisms would be great.
Yeah, it's like just I'm sorry, to add further to that. In fact, when I did the Wait But Why article, I said conceptual telepathy. I would presume it would be consensual, because you definitely don't want just people sending stuff into your brain without your consent. But a lot of our brain thought capacity goes into compressing our thoughts into words. And then you think of like the data rate of words. Words are very slow, very low data rate. And we're putting a tremendous amount of mental energy into compressing the concepts and thoughts in our head into words, and then slowly talking. The true thoughts, that we can obviously have far better communication because we can convey the actual concepts, the actual thoughts, uncompressed to somebody else.
So non-linguistic, consensual, and conceptual telepathy.
Exactly. Non-linguistic conceptual telepathy.
There we go.
Yeah, I've actually been excited from the beginning, sort of about the side benefit of these devices. I sort of see them as essentially like an oscilloscope to a printed circuit board is our device to the brain, where just by virtue of having this in there and being able to see what's actually going on, you'll end up learning a ton about how the brain works. And so sort of augmenting people, but also just using that to learn a lot more about like neurological diseases. It's really exciting to me.
So to sort of follow up on Elon's thought, I feel, and I imagine a lot of other people feel the same way, that there's a lot of sort of trapped creativity in your mind. You can, for example, close your eyes and conjure up like an incredible like Dali Kafkaesque scene. But if I wanted to actually show someone that, it would take years of honing a craft to be able to paint that. And so potentially with enough electrodes in the right places, you could begin to sort of tap into those raw concepts or thought vectors and be able to.
Artistry is a new field.
I like to think about ways to interface devices with biology better. And so one of the things I'm looking forward to is getting this thing to be less less like technology and more like biology, so that it really is seamlessly interfaced with the brain, stable for a very long time, and then similar to that, having stimulation be much more precise and multidimensional, such that eventually the brain sort of doesn't really know if it's being stimulated from outside or inside.
Yeah, following up on stimulation, one of the things our device can do is simultaneously read and write on every channel, stimulate and record. And that's, both a more challenging problem